Welcome to another episode, Caribbean Sports Gallery, where we again take a deep dive into cricket and we are going back into history. This time around, we have we're gonna try to get some. Well, I'm gonna pick my boy brain, Reza, my boy Reza. I'm gonna pick his brain. He is the historian, so definitely I want to pick his brain on what happened, what would have happened, how much he knows back in 1991, 92. That was the apartheid tour, we call it, to South Africa by the West Indies team. Reese, what's up with
Yes,
you?
yes, Robert. This test match, um, April the 18th to the 23rd, 1992, um, in front of a sparse crowd actually,
Mm-hmm.
because what happened here? But before I go into the sparsity of the crowd, this was South Africa's first test since 1970 when they were banned from international cricket because of the apartheid system.
Mm-hmm.
And this would have been over obviously what 22, 21, 22 years later. And Kensington Oval, Barbados, as I mentioned, April 18th to the 23rd. And the thing about it, this was South Africa's first test,
Mm-hmm.
and all but one of them were making their test debut. Because as I recall, Kepler Wessels had already played Test cricket, if you remember that name. And Wessels played for Australia back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
All the others were Test debutants, including, White Lightning Alan Donnell. And we know about Alan Donnell and his
Yes,
exploit.
I'm barely remembering that name.
Yes, yes, called him White Lightning. But controversy started from actually day one,
Mm-hmm.
because Anderson Cummings, the Barbadian medium fast bowler, he was not selected, and I believe it was Kenneth Benjamin, the Antiguan medium fast bowler,
Mm-hmm.
replaced Anderson Cummings, and the Barbadians were not happy about that at all. So we would say that there was a boycott of this test match.
That test match back then.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And at the end of the day, of course, in was it day five? Let me see here. Yeah, I think it was day five. Um, um, that when this match ended, there was this circular of the oval by Richie Richardson was the captain, and his team members. It was something that was unforgettable for other West Indian fans, other than I suppose Barbados. But that was the essence of this game that started after South Africa reemerged into the test arena 20, 21 years after they were banned because
They
of
were
the
banned.
apartheid system.
So, Reese, which brings the question. In 1991, apartheid hadn't, well, should we say, yet breathed its last breath. What would have convinced a West Indies team to set foot in South Africa should I say, on South African soil, when so many around the world were still saying, don't go, don't
Well,
go.
I mean, this thing really, I mean, exploded internationally and more regionally when the height of the apartheid system in South Africa. Remember in 82, 83, if I recall, um, Lawrence Rowe carried the first rebel tour to South Africa. And then they repeated that in 83, 84. And all the West Indians, that so-called second team, and a lot of them went for different reasons. Some wanted to see what was really happening in South Africa. Some mentioned and stated, well, it was all because they were working people that had to pay their bills. But here in the Caribbean, and certain governments were very, very much against, the West Indians, tying up, with South Africans, which was, of course, a predominantly white government. And all those players were banned. Um, Save and except the ban was lifted in 1989. And only one person, Ezra Mosley, if as I remember, was able to play Test cricket again for the West Indies. But by that time, all of them may have been, over their age. But apartheid in South Africa, as you may know, all in the 50s, 60s, 70s was a white, of course, alone policy in everything, in the social atmosphere, everything. And as we know that with the emergence of think it was his Nelson Mandela eventually became the
Mandela.
first black president in 1994. So that was a struggle from day one in terms of, that apartheid system. And but it affected everything politically, socially, sports wise. But West Indies, as I said, South Africa were readmitted to the international sporting fray back in 1991, and hence that first test in Barbados in April 1992.
Because I remember as a young person growing up, you were hearing about Pick Butter. I think that
Oh,
was his president, the president
yeah.
of South Africa then. And for a good while, I thought it was Pig, and not realizing it was PIC.
Yes.
And I always wondered, what kind of name is that? Is that the name that is creating that kind of, because as a young person growing up, you are hearing, especially in our culture, because
Hmm.
we grew up in a culture where everybody live with everybody, right?
Right.
Regardless of what is said, what is done. But you're growing up and then you are hearing, not having that full understanding. Okay, a West Indies team is banned because they went to another country. What, why, how? And it took
Mhm.
me a while to understand, wow, this is what created that mess, for want of a better word, back then. But just to, do you think, Reese, that would have had a bearing, a positive or negative bearing on the West Indies team going forward?
Yeah, yes, as I mentioned again, the same thing about you mentioned both. To my reading, if I recollect, and as I said, that he was quite extreme, and
Mm-hmm.
and when Mandela took over, I think his party, which I can't recall, right? I think is ANC,
The
African National Congress,
African
correct?
National Congress, yeah.
Yes, yes. De Klerk was the opposition. And de Klerk, Frederick de Klerk, if I remember correctly, he embraced this change actually. And But the specter of South African apartheid and the treatment of their black population, I mean, is certainly written in the history of time. As I mentioned, a question arose with the players and the comments when they went to South Africa. And there's this story of Larry Gomes. I mean, at the last minute, refusing to go to South Africa. Um, but were they missionaries or mercenaries? That was a question that Al Gilks, the Barbadian sports journalist, he told me,
Mm-hmm.
well, I know Al, I mean, not know, I never met him, but I spoke with him several years ago. And he was the only Caribbean journalist to cover that tour of South Africa. Now, um, I've read comments about experiences in South Africa, and they talk about, and I wouldn't call names because I haven't verified it with the players.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they went in South Africa with this sobriquet honorary whites.
Oh,
Yes,
oh,
yes, yes, yes,
wow.
honorary whites. And there's a report of one of them on the train being taken out of the train in the white section and went in the colored or black section. All
Mm-hmm.
right. Um, but I mean, some really, I mean, for Caribbean protagonists and commentators, honorary whites didn't come down. I mean, go down. I mean, well, with them, because how
That's
could you be an honorary white when you actually a black or colored man?
you're colored, and you're
Yes,
from, and where you are from.
yes,
Coming
yes,
from
yes,
this part or part of the world does not sound
yes.
good or
Well,
look good at
actually,
all.
in some of the books I've read, I think it was Rowe, and I mean, I don't want to confirm it, but I think it was one of the
Mm-hmm.
senior players mentioned, well, let's show the population what type of cricket West Indians bring. Not necessarily black versus white, but the skill. And I
The skill.
understand from my readings is that I mean, a lot of times there was, I mean, large crowds. And
Mm-hmm.
if I remember one of the stories, one of the West Indian players on the field of play, um, and stated that he was offered a bottle of water by a white kid, and
Mm-hmm.
he drank from it, and the kid drank from it also, which is a
Wow.
semblance of what was supposed to become really world unity between South African black and white, and of course
But,
So those experiences were somewhat, I mean, quite riveting to read. And what I want to say, Robert, is that why, that episode in the history of West Indian cricket, we should bring those players together at a forum. And cricket, as you know, we talk about this. Cricket is not only about bat and ball.
No, it's not.
Yes, about cultural, societal change, international affairs, and for young people to hear about this. I mean, or the players, and a lot of them are quite alive. Lawrence Roke, I mean, Collis King, uh,
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of these guys are
Alfred,
still around.
Fawad Bakr. So a lot of them are alive, and maybe as I have always batted for the introduction of West Indian cricket history in the curriculum of regional and academic institutions, schools, and otherwise. But we still wait on that. As I mentioned, I am going to Barbados. This in time for this test match. Of course, Australia was the
Hmm.
West Indies. And
Hmm.
I hope to, with God's permission, meet some persons who can influence that. Let's get West Indian cricket history into the school curriculum.
Reese, with that said, I'm going to put some pressure on you right now.
Oh,
But when you get there, get some information, maybe one or two interviews from somebody in the know, somebody who has the influence and the information that we can highlight on Caribbean Sport Gallery.
yes,
Because
actually,
I know young
I
people
will
who
seek
speak
out
it a lot.
I will seek out Al Gilks, actually. Many people don't
Wonderful.
know about his role as a reporter on that
Mm-hmm.
West Indies tour, Rebel tour, as we call it, of South
Mm-hmm.
Africa. The first Rebel tour, because they did go a second time
Yeah,
under
I
the
know there were
captaincy of
two
Lawrence
tours.
Rowe. And as I do have the results of the tours, but I can't remember it, off my head.
But don't
But
worry,
back,
it will come back soon.
so Al Gills, as you remember, you tell me, is a good guy to contact, for some sort of recollection of that tour. So for some people, I mean, regionalists, of course, government officials, it was not really supported. But for the players themselves who went to South Africa, reading the reports, and there's a book I have on that of South African tour. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they they um they as I mentioned to you early, they went to see what it is really like, the first-hand experience. Um, and most of them didn't really regret it, because it's not about the politics of race that they were putting in their heads and
Yeah.
accentuating, well, this is race and this is race and not race. But it was about bread and butter, finding out what is going on. Now, I am not here to support an opinion for or against. I'm just giving a
Mm-hmm.
neutral perspective. But it was quite a revelation. It was quite an episode that needs to be um, it needs to be spoken about um, in 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 West Indian Cricket Society and in the schools.
And most definitely because when you and you just I just remembered a few years ago I was in the Oval. I don't remember who. I think it was India was playing in the Oval, like India or Pakistan. I don't remember. And I was there as a medic, and I was in the stands, and I was talking to this supporter of the team. I think it was India, and he said to me, "So I always tell people, if you want to enjoy cricket, you have to come to the Queen's Park Oval." And I said, why? He said, because when you are here in the Queen's Park Oval in Port of Spain, you see people. You don't see race, you don't see color, you see supporters. And I think that might have stemmed from that, based on what you just said,
Yeah.
if we go back into our history with that rebel tour. So it is something that brings people together. And it was a bold move. But do you think that, that bold stand could that have been, for re-engagement through sport, or did it feel, as some people may have said, that we were shaking hands with the enemy? Or what team they shook hands with the enemy?
Again, as I mentioned, it had the pros and the cons, and I didn't want to draw to the conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who went, And then, of course, the players themselves and then the public, the regional governments. I mean, they had a strong opinion against it. Michael Manley and Forbes Burnham and these guys, if I remember correctly. But sport is really it is something that really unifies people of different colors and backgrounds, and that was quite evident in today's victory, South Africa over Australia. Bavuma, 5'3" of African descent, black South African. He united the entire country with this defeat over Australia, and for 5'3", you don't think he has, some kind of influence, but he has real influence in terms of, the players spoke about his effect and his leadership style. And I'm happy for Bavuma. He has brought South Africa again, not to say it wasn't, again of a renewal, again of unity and then, in strength, divided we fall, but unity is strength. So Bavuma did a fantastic job. And when same thing, Mandela had no kind of, what you call bad opinion of white South Africans, really.
Right.
In fact, if I remember, before we go into this match here, in 1995, a year after, South African rugby was at I think it's the Starbucks, you call them. It's from some there, and he backed the white South African rugby players, and they did win. I think it was against New Zealand in the final, or between 60,000 or 70,000 people at Johannesburg, and he by that gesture, he brought white and black South Africans together. So sport is really, a unifying part most of the times throughout the world.
Yeah, and you mentioned this player 5'3". I remember there was a bowler, a South African bowler, Makaya Ntini.
Yes,
and
yes.
I remembered, based on what I did, being around sports, being around young people back then, a lot of young people, I don't know if they understood what it meant for a black player to play for South Africa, but I witnessed a lot of young boys wanted to emulate Makaya Ntini.
For
And
sure.
this is a black man, made his mark on a white, a predominantly white team at the time.
Yes, yes.
So it
I
shows
think he
that
was the first black man to represent South Africa, was he? Remember.
and he
And
was
he
quite
was a
good.
terrific bowler. He was a
He was
terrific
quite
bowler.
good.
Yeah.
Really, really good. But you mentioned the name Anderson Cummings a while ago. Was it Anderson Cummings who was left out? You said, and
Yes. Anderson Cummings was left out in favor of Kenny Benjamin.
But do you think that was, just to touch back a bit, that boycott, do you think that was politically motivated or just, even more personalities at play? Listen, you know how we are in the Caribbean. Only a pick we boy, so we ain't coming and support.
Yeah, well, again, it brings into the core issue or what we have still present, I suppose, in the Caribbean, and that is the word called insularity. Because my pick, your pick, we pick how much Barbadian, how much Jamaican, how much Trinidadian on the side. It's been a real issue. Maybe still is because this present West Indian picks, is raising issues of insularity, but I don't want to go down in that as detail. I was on another time. But
Next,
I
next,
kind of
next
stay away from that. But when the West Indies were winning, especially in that period between 1975 and 1995, there was no kind of issue and talk about insularity.
No, because we were
winning, and we were one Caribbean, as we call it. But that issue with Cummings was, I would think, strictly based on, the fact is that we boy, not on the side. And
not
he
on
was
the side.
he was playing in Barbados, of course. And but say it is, well, as I said, the victory circle at the end of the game when West Indies won a thrilling match on that final day. Richie Richardson took his team around Kensington Oval hand in hand. And I have the team here if you want me to mention it. But if we want to go to this match itself, it was really a fantastic match, actually. And I have the scores here, if you permit me.
Mhm.
West Indies 262, 283 in the second innings. South Africa 345 and bowled out for 148. Now, there are key episodes in this game that we need to know because on the fourth day, oh, by the way, this was Jimmy Adams' test debut. On the
Mhm.
fourth day, oh, by the way, it was Brian Lara's second test match after 18
Mhm.
months in the wilderness, and that's
Yes,
another
yes.
story. Um, on the fourth day, South Africa ended with 122 for 2, Robert, chasing 201 for victory. And on the fifth day, they were bowled out for 148. And in that second innings, Ambrose and Walsh took all 10 wickets. Ambrose 6 for 39, I believe, and Walsh 4 for 31. That was, I mean, a tremendous performance. Actually, in
Yep.
one of Brian Lara's book, on the fourth day, the South Africans were already celebrating. I think he met them in some sort of, by the harbor, this
Mhm.
restaurant and all that nightlife down there in Bridgetown, Barbados, and they were already celebrating. But Ambrose and Walsh had different plans.
Different things, I have a friend, a former colleague
Yes,
of mine. He always say, a game is not lost until it is won. So
yes,
you don't count your chicken and eggs. And back
yes,
then
yes,
we knew what Ambrose and Walsh, what those guys were capable of. But
yes.
as we look back, Reese, it's easy to look back now. And we could say, well, okay, but the West Indies would have won that series. So it was worth it. But
Yeah,
let's
well, if you permit me, because this is good to know,
Mhm.
before your next question, if you permit me, I wanted to call out the West Indies side because this is good history, and maybe the South African side because this was their first Test match after 20 years.
Mhm.
West Indies: Haynes, Simmons, Lara, Richardson, Atherton, Adams, David Williams, our own wicketkeeper from here, Ambrose, Benjamin, Walsh, and Patterson. And South Africa was Rushmere, Hudson, Wessels, who played for Australia in the 80s, Kirsten, Cronje, the late Hansi Cronje, um,
Mhm.
Cooper, is it? Yeah, Kuiper, Richardson, Snell, Pringle, Alan Donald, and Bosch. And those were the 11 members of that cricket side, West Indies versus South Africa,
And
April
and
1992.
some top players you just call on both teams,
Yes.
undoubtedly.
Mhm.
Guys who we would like to see sometime in the near future, players of those caliber, rise up again. But I was about to ask you, is, do you think that 3-1 win that came at the cost of moral credibility?
Well, actually, it was just one test.
No, I'm the one that but we are looking at the tour to South Africa. Was it a three a
Which
four
tour are
test
you
series?
referring to?
Our
The
team
tour.
visited the South African tour. Was how many games did they play in that Rebel tour?
Oh,
The,
you're talking about the Rebel tour.
the
Sorry,
Rebel
sorry.
tour.
I can't recall the results. They played I mean two series back to back, 1982
Okay.
to 83 and then 83 to 84. But and they would have played a number of, I mean, I can't recall the amount of test matches. Neither one days. I have that elsewhere. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it was an overwhelming victory or defeat for either side. Um, and it was on par, I would say. But what I would say emphatically, the South Africans, black and white, I would say with any sort of no conviction, that they enjoyed, putting apart the racial politics of it. They would have enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
the cricket as displayed by the West Indian rebel side.
Great. But there's some I'm trying to remember where I pulled it from, where there was that concern that the West Indies use short pitched bowling tactics throughout. I'm not sure if it's one or both of the series. Some of the South Africans, they complain about those short pitch bowling being
Yes, yes,
dangerous
yes, yes.
and important.
You remember Colin Croft was on that side, and
Colin Croft, yes.
and he was not a easy bowler to face. Um, and there were others, I can't recall that name, that his pace troubled the South Africans. Um, and was it Mosley? Ezra Mosley. Well, he was
Ezra
there.
Mosley
Yeah,
was one
yeah.
of those names.
But yes, you may be correct in that statement about, because a lot of those South Africans would not have faced that kind of fast bowling in their past at all.
Mhm.
Um, but as I mentioned, it was almost on par with the outcome of the matches, both at the so-called, what do you call test level? Well, they were not tests unofficially or
They were
officially,
one of the top.
and the matches that were played in different parts of the country, the remote parts of the country, because they did go to those outskirts of the cities, um, to spread their brand of cricket.
And the West Indies, they would have dominated back then with pace, pure, raw pace and bounce. Do
Oh,
you think that that might have been a protest of some kind?
yes.
You
Now,
know,
he has come to my mind. I know my brain sometimes is freezing us, but the memory hits me now.
hmm,
That bowler was Sylvester Clark.
Sylvester Clark, and yes, I remember
Yes.
that name. I
That
remember
man,
that name.
I think as Steve Waugh said in some county match years ago, he was the most frightening bowler he ever faced, the former Australian
Hmm.
captain. But Clark was really frighteningly quick in his career. And he played for Surrey, of course, in the 80s, alongside Tony Gray, a good friend. Um, but Sylvester Clark, he didn't play many test matches at all. Maybe at what, 5 or 6 or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and he just couldn't get a continuous place because of the army of West Indian fast bowlers who were doing quite well back in the 80s. So Sylvester Clark would have definitely terrified some of those South African batsmen.
And Reese, it's ironic that you would make that statement there because back then we had raw pace, raw talent, raw power, and you had to be really good to earn a spot on the team.
Oh, definitely. And you're well pointed on that statement, because while I mentioned Sylvester Clark, I also would like to mention a bowler like Wayne Daniel,
Hmm.
who took pockets of wickets, for his county side, Middlesex, in the English County Championships and for over 40 over whatever, but mostly on the 3-day four matches. Wayne Daniel didn't last long. Winston Davis didn't last long, all because of that platoon of fast
Hmm.
bowlers that existed during the heyday of West Indian cricket. Because it was really dominated in the 70s and 80s, starting from Roberts, Holding, Garner,
Yeah.
Croft, Marshall. They were the big bowlers back starting from the 70s into the 80s. And then, of course, Ambrose and Walsh. Ambrose came in 88. Um, Croft came back in, I think, in 77 with Ghana. But
Hmm.
Ambrose came
I
in
remember them
88.
playing
Then
together.
we had Bishop and fellas like that who followed. Walsh came in 84, his first test match series in Australia in 1984. So during that conveyor belt, um, as I mentioned, 70s, 80s, it was difficult for fellas like Daniel and Clark, who should have, in another team, they would have had a more, of course, expanded career, test career, that is.
Mm. Hmm. Wow. But I want to go back to the name Cummings that created some controversy. Do you think if he
Yeah.
had been included in that team back then, would that controversy have evaporated, or would we still be having this conversation, but just with a different scapegoat? But I
No,
think we are
I
still moving
believe,
it there. You
as
may
I
have touched
said,
on it early on.
I think, you know, I mean, had Cummins been picked, then more than possibly we'd have seen a bigger crowd, and the controversy would not have fled. But um, Anderson Cummings, let me just check something here.
Mhm.
Um, Anderson Cummings, if I get his name here, bear with me. Anderson Cummings. Well, from what I see here, is 3 test matches. Hmm.
Oh,
Yes, yes. There's 3 test matches. Born in Christchurch, Barbados, on 7th of May, 1966. Um, but this book was written a few years ago. Um, but this is what I'm seeing here, and it's in comments. But I don't think that that controversy would have flared up had he been picked, because I mentioned that was I mean, insularity was still around. And in
mhm.
those days, it still is now, but in those days, I mean, the Barbadians were quite disappointed that he wasn't picked. And he may have had, if I recall, a good regional series. Um, Kenneth Benjamin was one of the bowlers again who didn't play a lot of test matches. He was really medium pace, but the lot that we spoke about, you know,
Mhm.
Sylvester Clark and Wayne Daniel, I mean, they were bloody quick. I remember, I want to share this with you. Colin Murray was telling me just 2 weeks ago at the Queen's Park Oval. He was West Indies under 19 captain, youth side,
Mhm.
to England back in, when was this? I think back in 1974. And Wayne Daniel was on that tour as a 19-year-old. And
Oh,
I think it's one of the matches, how many matches they played, I can't remember. But when he brought him back for a spell, Wayne Daniel frightened the daylights of those young English players. They
hmm.
were running from him at the age
Yeah,
of
so
19. Wayne
at the age
Daniel,
of 19.
yes, yes, he was a mean bowler. Colin Murray can't forget it. And I said, boy, Colin, you would not even want to be on that other side, facing the Wayne Daniel.
Daniel,
Wayne Daniel, I mean, not many test matches for the West Indies.
as great as he was. But it
Yeah.
is a team torn between politics, public pressure, pride. This, th- do you think, those players, would they have felt like ambassadors or mercenaries? In your head space, what do you think their dressing room would have felt like back then? I mean, that kind of pressure from around, from home, from everybody around.
Yeah. I see your point, and I can't speak for themselves. But just by reading about it,
Mm,
um, surely they would have known of the pressure and the strong comments from regional governments and fans as well. Some may have been empathetic. I mean, I showed empathy for them, but they would have had pressure, serious pressure. Um, Lawrence Rowe doesn't seem to regret it because he would have given his
mm,
reasons why. And the others, as I said, were bread and butter issues. They went there for their standard of living to
mm.
increase it or
Had to,
otherwise.
had to take care of the
They
family.
were out of a job, for instance. But the 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 scars from that tour from would have remained for a long time. I would think, reading the different reports, different books. Um, the fact is that the West Indies Cricket Board um, removed the ban in 1989 was of no really consequence because
Mm,
between 1982 and 83, when they went to South Africa, that 7-year period, not one of them was able to show their talent again regionally, except
regionally.
Ezra Mosley. Um, and where they would have gone. I mean, there are different ways where they have gone. I don't know. Maybe they went to club cricket. Some of them migrated. Um, and one of them, I mean, and I wouldn't call his name. One of them died from drug use. Finding him on the streets or wherever, and you would be surprised to know who he was.
Mm.
Son of a former legendary cricketer from Barbados. I mean, I was sold it out. But yeah, that was the experience. That was the experience.
So Reese, we are getting ready to wrap up this episode, but
Yeah.
I think this is the $1 million question. The
Mhm.
dust would have settled, series ended. Do you think anyone would have emerged as a winner, or did cricket just overpaper a wound that still hasn't fully healed?
Wow, that's a good one. This is 83, 84, 16. Robert, that's what, 40 years?
About that,
About
approximately.
that. Um, Still in the minds of definitely some fans who would never forgive. There's a book about the unforgiven. That's it. Written by
Mm.
an, I think, an external author, not West Indian, the for unforgiven. But to understand that,
There's a Western with that name also, but
yeah,
we're
yeah, the
talking cricket.
unforgiven. That's the name of the
Yeah.
book. To understand that, let's bring it into the classrooms. Um, as I said, 40 years ago, some things never are removed from the minds of people.
Mhm.
Uh, and some things just disappear like a mist from the morning sun. But history teaches us what happened and to take those lessons from what happened and carry it forward. We don't know where we are going, where we would be going unless we know where we came from,
Where we came from.
right? And I'm using my teaching capacity here. Um, for some and more many, it would still remain a deep scar, not only in the history of West Indian cricket, but the history of the West Indies society. Um, and if you, I mean, right now, as I said, South Africa is a different country right now.
Totally
But
different.
um, the policies and what was executed in those times and days, the actions, this apartheid, um, it's still, I mean, for those who experience it, and there are people, of
Mm.
course, white and black in South Africa and all other nations who would experience prejudice and all of that. Their experiences are still alive, or their memories are still alive. But
Yeah.
this is how it is and what it is. That rebel tour, as I mentioned, it was a question of whether, as we mentioned, whether it was a case of mercenaries or what was the next word we use?
Missionaries or
Sorry,
missionaries.
missionary.
Missionaries or mercenaries.
Mercenaries or missionaries. There could be a 50-50 cut on that, but I wouldn't want to draw that, I mean, that conclusion, I mean,
Mm.
emphatically. But it
Yeah.
was a moment because, I mean, Larry Gomes talk about it, talk about oh, yes, in his book, uh, which was launched last year, and I was there at
Last
the
year.
launch, right? I was there at one of the launch at the Larry Gomes Stadium, and I remember the
Hmm.
date, November the 15th. And he said openly also, and in the book, that he was offered, well, I mean, did he use millions? He was offered loud money,
Plenty.
loud
Back
money that would
then.
have
Back
taken
then,
care
yeah.
of his family and his future earnings in one shot. And then he thought about the consequences of what his family would think, what his people would think, especially from Arima. I mean,
Mm.
um, I think just on the verge of signing. He was already, I think, ready to get on the plane. And this is throbbing in his head, because Hugh Henderson giving him support. It's your decision. But this was 82, 83. He withdrew, carried on with his life. 82, 83, he had a great tour of England in 84. Came out second in the averages to Gordon Greenwich, I believe. That fantastic tour of England in 1984 when West Indies trounced England 5-0 in the test matches. But this is, again, before we leave, these what the books are for. Larry Gold launched this book 37 years after he retired. So, so you could say that history never dies, Robert.
And as we know, it repeats itself.
Yes,
as
yes,
they say.
yes, yes.
So it's about that time when we again take the veils off. The lights are faded. So to our viewers, hey, don't forget to like us, share, subscribe.
I'm happy to have gone back and turned back the pages of the Rebel Tour. A very poignant turn in West Indian cricket history. And I encourage those who are looking on to Google this moment. Not only the general public, but teachers and mentors who are what you call managing youngsters and taking care of youngsters in sports in general. And this is not only, as I mentioned, a cricket thing. It's an all sporting event that has an understanding for youngsters that they should understand, what sports history is about. Because they could be in the same position, and they could learn from these lessons.
We know, as you would know, what life has to offer on and off the field, what the game has to offer. And we're going to come back sometime in the very near future. We're going to continue with this Rebel Tour or tours similar to this, controversies or not.
Robert, catch you then. Experience is the greatest teacher.
All the time. All the time, my brother. All the time. All the time.
Great, man.
So, catch you on another episode of Caribbean Sports Gallery.
All right. Thank you so much.
That's my brother.